Okay, my English teacher friends. So I'm back. I've been absent for a little while with COVID pneumonia, but I'm on the mend and have my energy back to start making some writing workshops with all of you. So, one project that I want to undertake is to capture the 25 most commonly taught short stories in the American high school curriculum, and this is my first video, and this is probably one of, well, not probably one of the one, it is a text that we've probably all taught at some point in our career or will find ourselves incorporating into our classrooms. So I'm going to start with the yellow wallpaper and basically do the status quo for those that are familiar with my work. So I will start with the question, how do we tackle the introductory body paragraph? How are kids going to construct that and write it? And my tacit response is they're going to declare or invert the thesis. And as we move to the body paragraphs, we ask a similar question. How are we going to construct the body paragraphs? And again, it's the same answer. We're going to tackle it syllogistically. So, for those that are familiar with my work, hopefully you're saying to yourselves, holy cow, this guy's not lying. These two sets of templates can be used across the expository modes. So, what I'm doing here for short stories, you've seen it for novels, you've seen it for plays, FRQ1, FRQ2, FRQ3, all the expository modes on the Lang exam, and then I've tackled research on top of that. So once your students master these couple of templates, the writing kind of takes care of itself, which is glorious in the sense that if we can help them with their reading in terms of ascertaining good, accurate reads, then we have some pretty fantastic students on hand as far as readers, writers, thinkers, speakers go. So let's jump right into this. The yellow wallpaper. So, one of the things I say a lot to teachers when I work with them, when I push into districts or work with departments or even teachers that take my courses, is the following. You got to Bob Ross your instruction. And here's what I mean by that. If you've ever watched Bob Ross, he's always at the easel, at the canvas, demonstrating very clearly for his students how to orchestrate the painting and how to manipulate their way around the painting. So he positions himself as the expert teacher, student follows. So I tell my teachers, position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom and show your students plenty of exemplars and models. So, what I will do for you, the teachers, is what I do for my students. So, I'll say during this writing workshop, here are four introductions, to declare, to invert, and it demystifies the writing process when students can see real good concrete exemplars and models. They in turn can go and execute on their own with minimal ease. So the question is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And it's the same answer. We can declare or invert the thesis. And let's talk real quick about what the declarative and inverted look like, just in case it's new for you or been a while. So with the declarative thesis, the student begins by dropping the thesis. Literally, first sentence, boom, drop the thesis in that opening line as declaratively and succinctly as possible. From there, it gets into um, some of my nuance academy things that I have YouTube videos on and that are a staple of my mastermind course. Um, this idea that comes from Strunk and White, the idea that there are 12 different ways to construct a sentence. You're going to see my students have real nice sentence complexity in an attempt to achieve voice rhythm and flow. So they won't be doing that short, simple declarative sentence that we often see weaker writers do. My students also um, go through an intensive word study academy the entire academic year. So you'll see a fair amount of what I call tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is just your average run of the mill SAT level word. Um, the kicker with introductions is while the template's in place, they have to be exactly 4 sentences long, no more, no less. So exactly 4 sentences. So the remaining component is context and background. So begin with the thesis, sentence constructs, tier 2 level vocab, context, background, exactly 4 sentences. So in literary analysis, though, for those of you that have seen enough of my work, we tend to see that most of the time the kids are going to invert the thesis. In fact, when students declare, they often set themselves up for plot analysis and not literary analysis. And we'll look at that in just a second. So in the inverted model, you end with the thesis, which means that you're going to begin with the context and background, and then the focal focus stays the same on the sentence constructs in terms of the general nuance, the tier 2 level vocabulary, and just like the declarative, it's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So let's look at a few. And this is a slide that may look familiar. So I contend that in every prompt, especially on the AP exam, AP Lit exam, in particular FRQ2, so the Yellow Wallpaper, this writing workshop, closely approximates the skill set of FRQ2. So implicit in those prompts are 2 questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? If the student is able to provide answers to both of those questions, they're going to come up with a pretty solid thesis statement that unquestionably is going to meet the demand of the assignment, which is to perform literary analysis. So let's keep those 2 questions in mind. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So here's the first one. And the first 3 sentences, the student's going to focus on the authorial intent. And in the 4th sentence, they're going to focus on the construction of meaning. So the context and background comes up top, thesis comes at the bottom. So this is going to be a classic inverted model. Women may be born with the innate freedoms bestowed upon them by a higher consciousness, but quickly, almost from day one, they get born into a system of subordination. And that's like the main thrust of the story, right? It's the main idea. So start with there. What is the authorial intent? Equality is not actualized because of the confining restraints of the cult of domesticity, a system separating the genders into an imbalance of power. In effect, men control virtually every aspect of a woman's life, so much so that he has dominion over her mental health. All right, in the last sentence here, we're going to get to the construction of meaning. And when students do this, they isolate the terms and devices that are really germane, sort of like, the essence of the story. So listen to how the terms and devices are used here. Perkins Gilman arrives at these truths through the symbolism of the yellow wallpaper in the narrator's epistolatory style. And that's how you do it, exactly 4 sentences. So the first 3, what is the authorial intent? The 4th, how does the author construct meaning? So that's one way to tackle the inverted model. Here's another one, and it's going to use the exact same template. High society is actually a degradingly low system of abuse for women during the context of the yellow wallpaper. 2 gender spheres exist, one that privileges the man, another that greatly restricts women to the point where they are stripped of their God-given rights. When one is beneath the weight of another's oppressive hold of power, it is easy to understand how a mind can break while a great sense of self can take root. So that's all of the authorial intent. Get to the construction of meaning. Perkins-Gilman demonstrates how these factors operate through, so here's the term, the symbolism of the yellow wallpaper and the various ironies of the plot structure. So again, focus on the terms and or devices. You can do that every single time. You know, it works for the yellow wallpaper. It works for any short story, any novel, play, poem. You can do it for rhetorical analysis if you choose. So it's a go-to template every single time a student writes. Now, here's something else that we have to take a look at, though. There's a trend in AP circles where teachers are preferring students not to use their literary terms in the thesis statement. And I'll show you in a second that when students write syllogistically, it's actually more artful to withhold the terms um, and devices from the thesis, because they're going to be held off until the first premise of the syllogism. So there is a way to do this withholding the terms and devices, and I'm just showing you a couple of options, and it becomes teacher preference. So I know for me, I make some of my struggling and emerging writers articulate the terms. Otherwise, they end up invariably performing plot analysis instead of lit analysis. It's sort of a guardrail or a training wheel just to fully make sure that they have a thesis statement, because that's half the battle. But my more adept writers don't need to follow something that contrived, and can take a more skillful approach to it. So this one's going to do the exact same thing. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? Just withhold the terms in the last sentence. So here it is. It is essential that one never allow another person to be the one defining their life. Self-definition is so vitally important in creating one's humanness and sense of authenticity, so much so that it is hard to call your life your own without seizing this power for oneself. The nature of creating such a life and identity is the struggle of finding the language to express the formation of this new identity, trying to take shape. Perkin-Gilman's protagonist arrives at this true sense of self through that struggle to create a language that liberates her from an antiquated system of power. So this student easily could have gone into ideas of symbolism, irony, the epistolatory structure, and really got focused on those literary aspects. But we can withhold those for the body paragraph, the first premise of the body paragraph. This unquestionably has a thesis statement. It's just more subtly arrived at than explicitly stating the terms and devices. So here's one last one that's going to take the exact same approach. Words create meaning, which then in turn creates worldviews in one's subsequent perception of that world. But when those words are stolen by systems like the cult of domesticity, one can quickly lose all sense of clarity and see a world that is very distorted and confusing. In terms of owning one's power, it is essential that language be of one's own making, not the making of an antiquated system meant to keep an entire gender subjugated. Perkin-Gilman's protagonist, through arduous turmoil, comes to embrace the challenges of defining herself free from societal constraints to become a person she can understand and accept. So again, it's the same one as the last one. It's what is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2 level vocabulary. 4 for 4 all did the same thing. 2 of them dropped the terms and devices, 2 withheld them. So either way, students can do this every single time they sit down to perform literary analysis, no matter the genre. So the next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And I'm going to say nothing changes. So the same old template can be used every single time. So we're going to proceed syllogistically. For those that are new to this, And for those that just need a quick refresher, I'm going to give a real cursory overview of the syllogistic method. I have other videos where I really hammer it home and give a thorough tutorial of it, and you can backtrack and look at those if you need to. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, and Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, where the rich aristocratic boys would go to learn things like polemics, oration, basic word wrangling, debate, and then the math and the sciences. And during debates, he would throw out a question like, "What is justice?" And the boys and the great philosophical thinkers would come to the mic and they would offer definitions of what they thought justice is. And ultimately, each definition would get tore apart and proven to be futile or inadequate. So more definitions would have to be proposed, and each one would get debunked until the debate came to an end. And Aristotle said, why is it that some of my boys are so good at this? Like they win debates, they're master orators, and other of my students are just like meh, they're okay. And some kids just tank bomb every single time. And he had a eureka moment one day and he said, I got it. The real good orators think syllogistically. And here's what he meant by that. It's when you just argue logically, when you create a line of reasoning that goes from premise to conclusion. And as an example, let me provide you with this. If I were to say in a first premise, arsenic is deadly, then in my second premise, my dog ate arsenic, the natural conclusion we would make in terms of line of reasoning is that my dog is going to die. When kids write, that's what we mean by line of reasoning. That's the exactitude to which we need them to write in order to be cogent in their arguments. So my template operates under these guises in terms of getting students to sustain that line of reasoning from start to finish in each body paragraph. So, in terms of making that syllogistic method into a heuristic or a template for the purposes of performing literary analysis, it looks like this. The first premise is going to be an argument containing literary terms and or devices. So this is why you don't need to say them in the introduction, because they're coming right at the beginning of the body paragraph. The second premise is going to be your textual support, and I tell my students to teeter-totter balance their quoting and paraphrasing. Don't do one so much more at the expense of the other. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. And I want to emphasize that. Not the conclusion paragraph of the essay, but the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is your textual analysis. And I'll show you there what I mean by links. So you're going to kind of echo and link back to the first premise in the thesis, because the line of reasoning in essence is a circle. It comes full circle on itself. So you're going to end where you begin and kind of harken back to your original premise. And I tell my students that the first premise is a promise, and in the conclusion, you kind of got to shake hands back to that and make sure that you're honoring your word. So students ask this question all the time. They're smart. They say, Mr. Kuhn, if introductory body paragraphs are to be 4 sentences and 4 sentences alone, how many sentences should we be shooting for in a syllogistic body paragraph? And here's the thing. As teachers, we've all received essays where students submit 4 to 5 sentence body paragraphs, and they just leave us wanting for so much more. There's just not enough support and analysis there to really advance an argument. And then we've seen, essays that are one big block paragraph, and that drives us nuts. So I think in order to be dutiful and really hammer home an argument, I tell my students to shoot for 10 sentences, hard cap at 12. Otherwise, the student's probably going to prattle, babble, get waylaid a little bit, and end up getting too plot heavy. So I think to do a good, thorough job 10 sentences is the magic number. So let's look at a whole paragraph. The first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long. And what they need to do is make an argument getting anchored in the terms and devices. Typically, what I tell my students to do is start where the author starts. And that's great advice for chronological sequencing. You want to have an organizational pattern to your writing. So start where the author starts. And that's in a roundabout way what this student did. It's not exact, but you'll see that she's very methodic in terms of how she sets up the line of reasoning. So in those first 3 sentences, get the terms and devices anchored in an argument. So here it is. In many regards, Gilman uses the conventions of the psychological whore tale to critique the institution of marriage and the cult of domesticity, especially as practiced by the respectable classes of our time. In a conventional 19th century middle-class marriage, with its rigid distinction between the domestic functions of the female and the active work of the male, this ensured that women remained second-class citizens, small and much less significant than their counterparts. The narrative device of the epistle format accentuates John's dominion and his wife's seeming compliance to his superior intelligence. So that took 3 sentences. Now go back to what we were just talking about. We just made a promise to the reader. We said, "Dear reader, we're going to talk about A, B, and C in this body paragraph." Now, in terms of sustaining a clear line of reasoning, we can't deviate from this promise. We can't bring in anything else. We cannot neglect to pull in support and analysis to every aspect of this promise. Otherwise, we have logical fallacies and our line of reasoning is going to snap in half. So starting in the 4th sentence, you're going to want to start transitioning into the second premise, which is your support, your quoting and paraphrasing. So immediately, let's get into that. Go chronologically, go sequentially. Language is power, and while John sees his wife trying to give voice to her changing sense of self, he quickly puts the brakes on it. The narrator is quick to tell us that John has cautioned her not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with her imaginative power and habit of story making, a nervous weakness like hers is sure to lead all manner of excited fancies, and that she ought to use her will and good sense to check the tendency. So that's what I mean. You got to get quoting. It's a teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing, which we have. Now, one thing that I do when I grade is look for quote deliberation. Does this quote match the first premise? So there's promises here. Does this quote help sustain that promise? And I would say, yes, this is a perfect quote. The student quoted with much deliberation. So you should see as kids practice these templates that they're going to quote with, their quotes are going to be crisper, more accurate, more to point, more germane than what you might be accustomed to see. I find without templates, and without a lot of practice, students just kind of willy-nilly choose quotes. So this syllogistic body paragraph continues on to the next slide. Let's see how to transition out of this quote. In other words, John is suggesting that he is of superior thought as a man, so therefore should be left to do the thinking for even his wife. Within this time, this is normal. Let the man seize total control of the woman. The journal is an essential place for the narrator to give voice to her thoughts. With a very sincere, almost heartbroken tone, she shares in her journal that John and her tried to have a real earnest, responsible talk and tell him how she wished he would let her go and make a visit to Cousin Henry and Julia. But he said she wasn't able to go. She did not make out a very good case for herself, for she was crying before she had finished. So you can see here, it's important to have a few levels of quoting, a few levels of paraphrasing so that you have enough support. So it's this quote, analyze, paraphrase, right? 1, 2, 3, punch. So let's see how we get out of that quote. Even the self expression of crying is weakness and madness. Despite the desire to have a conversation as equals, John yet again controls the strings. So that's a lot of support. And we're quickly approaching that 10 sentence mark. The conclusion usually just takes 2 to 3 sentences, and we got to draw it back, fully keep the promise, and then let's hear shadows of one of the thesis statements that we shared earlier. The day spent alone in that room with a head full of thoughts is what ultimately led to the formation of a language that produced a sense of liberation and self acceptance. Forming the words was the necessary action needed to broker the change, to gain a sense of independence and freedom. So let's go back, because the line of reasoning is the biggest thing. Was this promise kept? Are all the quotes germane? Paraphrasing germane? Is there enough of it? Are we satisfied? Have we proven our point? Did we deviate? Is everything substantial enough? And the answer is yes. This stays is clearly cogent, um, and well argued from start to finish. And it's doing a lot of the same things in terms of nuance and style, what we were talking about in the introduction. Keep the tier 2 vocab up, focus on those sentence constructs, keep an academic tone, you know, without sounding overly pedantic, and you're rocking and rolling. So this is going to bode well for students who write like this. And the template produces this as students practice it over and over and over again. And you, Bob Ross, your instruction for your kids, invariably you'll see this as the academic year proceeds. So I'm going to wrap this up and just quickly talk about a few projects that I have on the docket. So I will be doing some webinars with Perfection Learning. I'm slated to do one a month for the foreseeable future. I'm healthy again. I feel I had to cancel last month just because I wasn't feeling well. But pay attention to that. I'll make notifications in the group and send out email reminders. But you could also follow a Perfection Learning site. I have some irons in the fire with the National Writing Project. And the project that I'm most proud of and most eager to tackle is that Tim Freitas of the Garden of English and I are co-authoring a textbook together. And we're knee deep into it. I still have some writing to do, and he does as well. And something I've created to help me gather my data and kind of essential research for the construction of that textbook is something that I'm calling the Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind. So it's a 5-week professional development opportunity, and I'm looking for teachers that are really willing to revamp their classroom outlook and their perspective on the teaching of writing. Preferably, young teachers or frustrated teachers, teachers willing to give a brand new start to their outlook on composition. So we're going to work for 5 weeks together, 5 consecutive Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an hour. And basically, what you'll do is take my whole kit and caboodle into the classroom. I'll look over your shoulder and work closely with you and your students. And we'll report back to each other and just kind of anecdotally parcel together some evidence for the textbook. So if that's something you would like to participate in, that'd be fantastic. And then I know teachers that have participated in it so far really enjoyed the professional development opportunity and the collegial connections that they formed with other members in the mastermind. So if you want more information, you can email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. You can have the PowerPoint that we just looked at. If you email me, I can forward that to you. If you want more information on my work with the National Writing Project, Perfection Learning, or the Mastermind, email me. And I have a lot of the specifics on my webpage with regards to the mastermind, and that's at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So hope all is well, and I hope you benefited from this. For now, happy teaching and happy writing.